Hey everybody, it's Adam back again from the Army Painter with yet another tutorial. We're going to be focusing in on one of the characters that we've developed for a brand new product line called Gamemaster. Freya Caldwell is a human female warrior, a bit aggressive and sometimes a little bit drunk. She may have the appearance of the angel, but she's anything but angelic once she opens her mouth. This will be the final installment in our three-part Freya tutorial series. We began by learning the basics of base coating and washing in our Adventure Ready tutorial. Then we moved on to learn how to highlight and reestablish some of those base tones in our Level Up video. In this final Masterclass tutorial, we're going to expand on those with some more refined techniques. So let's take a look at the paints that we'll be using today. Now that you've gotten your paints, go ahead and grab some clean rinsing water. Maybe you want to use a wet palette. I sure love to use mine. And don't forget your favorite brush, and let's get started. All right, you can see the model here. We've already added our initial highlights in the level up phase. I'm going right to the skin tones, and I'm going to apply just very subtle highlights here using Fair Skin. I'm going to focus this highlight. I'm using a small character brush from our Wargamer brush range on the bridge of the nose and just the tops of the cheeks, the lower lip, and of course her eyebrows. I'm also going to just draw a little line on the ridges of her knuckles and fingers here, leaving the wash that we applied in the first video in our Adventure Ready tutorial in the recesses. Now I'm going to begin highlighting up all of the blues, and I'm going to apply this highlight almost as a glaze. I've thinned this down quite a bit with my wet palette, and I'm going to work in this highlight just very gradually and subtly on the uppermost areas of her blue pants and of course the sheath of her dagger. This is really going to make this blue on the model pop. So I'm just going to go back to my palette here and grab a little bit more, and I'm just going to take this and pull a very simple highlight on this sheath of her dagger. Just like so. Now finishing off all of the blue on this model, I've taken Ghostly Blue, and this is a very bright blue, and I've used very thin down paints, and again my character brush from our Wargamer range, and I'm just going to add a very simple line highlight here just to really pick out these areas, the details on the model like so, and this is really going to make this blue pop. We've got our darker blue in the recesses and the shadows, and this brighter blue on the hard edges. Now I'm going to focus in on all of the red on the model, and for this I've taken a bit of our initial color, Dragonfire Red, which we applied in our Adventure Ready tutorial and then again in our Level Up tutorial to reinforce the base tones. Now I'm mixing in just a bit of Rust Monster, a nice fiery orange color, and I'm just going to pull a very subtle gradient with my brush. This is a very thin down paint across all of the red on the model. Then with pure Rust Monster, I'm just going to pull a simple line highlight here and feather some of it back in. I'm not worried. There's not a lot of hard edges on these red panels of her armor coat here. So I just want to find some key areas on this red to focus in with this brighter orange tone and really shift from the darker reds after we've washed the model down to this brighter orange tone. So very simply, I'm just going to pick out some of the corners of these red areas like so, like this little area right here around her waist. That'll be it for the red. Now I've taken a bit of Lawful White, and I had some Ancient Mummy still left over on my palette from our Adventure Ready and Level Up tutorials. I've mixed in just a bit of the Lawful White, and I've thinned it down a bit, and I'm just going to pull some of the highlights across the raised edges of her hair on the model. Very simply here, in some areas like right here, I can just use the edge of my brush and just kind of trace it with the side of the brush along, but in some areas like back here on the ponytail of the model, I'm just going to very carefully and neatly pull this highlight on the raised edges. Now I've taken a 50-50 mix of rigid leather and ruddy skin, and I love using ruddy skin when highlighting up dark, rich leathers. Now I'm just going to start by pulling an edge highlight, and by edge highlight I mean I'm just drawing a very faint line, a very simple line on the hard areas on the model. And what I might do is I might just go back and feather this in afterwards. This establishes the highlight, and then we'll go back and we'll just blend some of this into the rest of the areas that were previously painted in rigid leather. So like back here on the back of her boot, I'm just going to pull and feather this very thin down application of Ruddy skin and rigid leather just to build up a nice highlight and give these boots a nice vibrant appearance. Again, you're going to hear me mention quite a bit the darker tones that we established in our Adventure Ready tutorial by applying a wash and laying down our base tones beforehand. Now we're really just going to focus in on the highlight areas. We're almost painting this in a very comic book and cartoony manner to really make it pop on the tabletop. So you'll see that I'll pull these little highlights on the ridges, and then I will feather in this 50-50 mixture across the raised areas. And now that I've applied the simple line highlights, the edge highlights, I can go back and find where I want to reinforce some of that 50-50 mixture, like right here at the bottom of this, I'm not sure what you call this, waist armor. And once that's had time to dry, I'm going to go to pure Ruddy skin, and I will reinforce the hardest edges on all of the areas that we've previously highlighted. So I've taken a very thin down application of Ruddy skin, and again, I'm using my character brush here. It's great for very fine detail work. And I'm just going to find those hard edges, those folds at the bottoms of her boots, like here. And I'm just going to pull a very, very simple highlight. If you get a little too heavy-handed here, don't worry. You can always go back to your Ruddy skin and rigid leather mixture or pure rigid leather to go ahead and just fix it a little bit, tidy it up. I'm also going to use Ruddy skin to highlight up some of the leather belts and straps on the model, like this belt here. Just very simply going to pull a very simple fine line across the top and then the bottom edges of this belt around her waist. Going back to the palette now, getting a little bit more paint loaded up on the brush. And I'm just going to pick out the details around the model that we previously painted in these leather tones, really make them pop. This Masterclass tutorial is all about really bringing the model to that next level, really make it pop, exaggerate all of those highlights and hard edges on the model. With all those leather bits done, we're going to move on to the other leather bits. Remember, there was a lot of brown in this model. We used a lot of rigid leather, Bugbear brown, and Owlbear brown. Now I've got a 50-50 mixture of skeleton bone and Bugbear brown. And I'm just going to go ahead and find those areas and apply a simple highlight. She's got some nice filigree, some nice detailing and etching on her boot here. I just want to pick out the raised areas with this 50-50 mixture very simply, very carefully. And on these areas here, these pieces of armor around her wrists, I'm using the edge of my brush, and what you'll see me doing here is I'm focusing on the top half of these rounded areas. These pieces of armor wrap in a cylindrical manner around her arm, and I just want to focus this highlight on the top half of these areas, leaving our initial highlight from the level up phase to exist underneath. This creates a nice shadowing effect. You're probably noticing a theme here where I take a 50-50 mixture first to apply my first layer of highlights, and then I go back to the brighter tone to apply our second and final highlight on these areas. So now I'm using skeleton bone, and I'm just going to reinforce the highlights that we were previously working on the areas here around the skirt of her armor. I'm just going to apply a very simple edge highlight using that edge of my brush to trace the highlight on. This provides a very simple and a very easy to pull off highlight on these hard edges on the model. This is something that you can practice at home. If you have an old model, just find the hard edges and use the side of your brush and run it perpendicularly along a hard edge to pull off this effect. Or you could just try it on any of the models that you're presently working on. And the beauty in painting is that it's okay if you do make a mistake, you could always go back and paint over top of it. Now moving on to orc skin, and I'm just going to continue to pull highlights across these gray areas on the model. Now, when I say pull highlights, I literally mean pull. You can see that I'm using the brush in a pulling motion. I'm pulling the brush towards me. It's much harder to push a highlight on the model because the brush will tend to fold and billow and balloon out. So I literally mean pull the brush in simple, just very cautious strokes towards you, and you can pull off some very simple and effective highlights. We had the pleasure to work with world-famous graphic designer and illustrator John Gallagher on the graphic artwork for the Gamemaster boxed art, and he had a great deal of input on the design of this character. Now, she may appear on the surface as just a drunken warrior, but I'm sure that there's more to it. Let's hear what John has to say about his work with Freya.
And as the father of a ferocious, beautiful daughter, nothing inspires me quite like that. There's no doubt that there's no hesitation in her spirit, which is I think a great, in and of itself, as a life lesson, is a great one to have. It's just fearlessly charged when you know that you're equipped to handle whatever the potential challenge may be. And I'd like to see, Freya occupy a center position in the party as the adventures move forward. Clearly, everything about her pose and her position inside of the party say that she's clearly naturally built for this, and that's kind of marvelous. I'd like to see where it all ends up. I'm looking forward to seeing what the team does with Freya in the future.
Thanks a lot, John. It's really been a pleasure working with you, and we'll get to know a little bit about our experience with not only Freya, but 4 of the other characters from the Gamemaster story. Now I've taken a bit of Lawful white, and I'm going back over top of some of these gray areas on the model and these pavers on the base. And I'm just going to apply a very simple highlight just to pick out the details, and again, really make them pop, especially when they're sitting across the table from you at your next dungeon party. Moving on to highlight all of the golds here, I've taken a little bit of the Lawful white that was on my palette and mixed it in with some of that Kieran gold, and I'm just gonna pick out and pull the most raised areas and highlights on the gold armor on the model. Now I'm taking pure silver dragon, and very carefully here on these small rivets, I'm just going to apply a very simple dot, and just a simple dot on the edges of this belt buckle here, just being very careful. You don't want to forget about her little crown here. You want to make sure that that's nice and bright. She is the warrior of this group after all. I'm going to move on to highlighting the sword, and for this I just pull a simple edge highlight using the edge of my brush along the sharp raised area of the sword. I'm just going to pull a highlight here up at the top, and then I'm going to go back to my palette, load up the bristles a little bit more, and I'm going to focus on the center part of this blade, and I'm just going to highlight and build up this brighter silver tone in the center. We're going to come back and add some really cool effects later. So now I've mixed a bit of Warpaints mixing medium with Merfolk Turquoise. This is a great and very simple way to pull off what we like to call a glazing effect. I'm going to walk you through this in the next few steps here, but just apply some of this Merfolk Turquoise to the center of the sword. And now I'm using Xanathar Blue, and again the Warpaints mixing medium, and I'm using this as a glaze. And when I say glaze, it means a very thinned down application where it's very translucent, and you build this up in layers. So you can see here, it looks very bright at first when I first apply it. That's the pigment showing through, but as it dries, it tones down quite a bit. You can see some of that silver showing underneath. This is a very simple way to pull off a power sword or a glowing magical sword effect. So I'm taking some of that Xanathar Blue, and I'm just working it back and forth over top of the Merfolk Turquoise to build a nice blend from that blue to turquoise, that lighter blue color as we go along. What's really fun about this is that the paint, using that Warpaints mixing medium, stays a little bit workable on your palette, on your surface that you're working with a bit longer. So you have a lot of freedom to go back and forth when working on these blends. I'm going back to the Merfolk Turquoise, and I'm just going to work it back in to that Xanathar Blue to make a nice gradient. I want to reinforce some of the blue tones here and really make it look like it's beaming with blue energy. And now I'm going back to Xanathar Blue, and I'm going to blend this in while the Merfolk Turquoise is still workable thanks to that Warpaints mixing medium on the blade to produce a very nice and seamless gradient. You can almost imagine that the power is emitting from the sword was granted to her from one of her sorcerer friends on her dungeon adventure. Now I'm going to take a little bit of Gelatinous Blue. This is a very bright, almost white blue, and I'm going to create some etch marks, almost like lightning strikes, down the center of the blade. And I'll come back with the Xanathar Blue and just feather that back into the edges so it just blends in seamlessly, and we leave a little bit of that Gelatinous Blue untouched in the center, almost as if a lightning bolt is emitting from the center of her sword. And there you go, a simple and easy power sword in just a few steps. To finish off the model very simply, I'm going to apply some tufts from our Battlefield's Tufts range. I'm using Scorched Tuft here, and I'm just going to apply this in a very random area on the base, somewhere that I think looks fitting. And now I'm using Mountain Tuft. I think these two really complement each other really well. The brownish reddish tone matches the reddish yellow tones in the other. And here she is, our human warrior, the most powerful warrior in our dungeon party. She looks very fierce. I'm really happy with how this model turned out, and I hope that you followed along at home when you were painting up one of your warriors for your dungeon party. If you're just tuning into this one, go back and watch from the very beginning where we started in our Adventure Ready tutorial, how to paint Freya. Well, I hope you enjoyed this masterclass tutorial as much as I enjoyed painting up this Freya model for you today. Remember that you can find all of the paints and products that we used in today's tutorial at your friendly local game store, from your favorite online retailer such as Amazon, or at www.thearmypainter.com. Remember that the magic in miniature painting is that it can be as simple or as challenging as you'd like it to be, but with the right techniques, you're sure to achieve some great results. We'll see you next time.